Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from today, as we dive into a story that proves sometimes the most unexpected heroes emerge in the darkest moments. When Cain, the Beast Rodriguez, decided to pick on a homeless teen outside his gym, he had no idea he was about to face the wrong man on the wrong day. Some say it was fate that brought Jason Statham to that particular street in Los Angeles. Others call it divine intervention. But what happened next would become the talk of the underground fighting world for years to come. The morning sun cast long shadows across the entrance of Elite Combat Training Center, where Cain Rodriguez had just finished another brutal training session. Standing at 6'2" and weighing 220 pounds of pure muscle, the Beast had earned his nickname through years of devastating victories in underground fighting circuits. His latest win streak had reached 15, with 12 knockouts that left his opponents requiring medical attention. But it wasn't just his fighting skills that made people fear him, it was his reputation for bullying those who couldn't fight back. David Collins huddled in his usual spot near the gym's entrance, his thin frame wrapped in a worn jacket despite the warm California morning. At 16, he had already experienced more hardship than most adults, losing his family in a tragic accident and ending up on the streets. The spot by the gym had become his temporary haven, mainly because Maya Thompson, a dedicated social worker, would often bring him food and try to convince him to come to the youth shelter she ran. That morning, David's presence caught the Beast's attention in the worst possible way. Cain had been particularly aggressive during his training session, frustrated by rumors that some promoters were starting to question his legitimacy as a fighter. He needed an outlet for his anger, and the teenage boy seemed like an easy target. His training partners, Marcus and Jake, flanked him as always, ready to laugh at whatever their leader did. Just 2 blocks away, Jason Statham was walking toward the gym, having heard about its reputation for producing tough fighters. He had been scouting locations for his next film project, looking for authentic fighting environments that could add realism to the scenes. What he found instead would remind him why he got into martial arts in the first place: to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The confrontation began with Cain's booming voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Hey kid, this isn't a homeless shelter. This is a place for warriors." His followers snickered, already anticipating the entertainment to come. David tried to make himself smaller, hoping to avoid any trouble, but the Beast was just getting started. "I said, this isn't your personal bedroom, boy." Cain moved closer, his massive frame casting a shadow over David. "What's wrong? Can't afford a gym membership? Or are you just here to steal from paying customers?" Marcus and Jake spread out, forming a semicircle that cut off David's escape routes. Maya Thompson had just parked her car across the street, carrying a paper bag with breakfast for David. She froze at the sight of Cain towering over the teen, knowing the Beast's reputation for violence. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone, but she knew calling the police wouldn't help. They never arrived in time to prevent what Cain and his crew did to their victims. Jason Statham had stopped at the corner, taking in the scene with the trained eye of someone who had spent decades in martial arts and action films. He noticed everything: the bully's stance, the trapped teenager, the worried woman across the street, and most importantly, the growing crowd of onlookers who seemed too afraid to intervene. Cain grabbed David's jacket, lifting him slightly off the ground. "Maybe you need a lesson in respect, kid. This is a place for real men, not street trash." The teenager's feet scraped against the concrete as he tried to find footing, his eyes wide with fear. "Please," David managed to whisper, "I'm not bothering anyone. I'll leave." His voice cracked, betraying both his youth and terror. But his words only seemed to amuse Cain and his followers more. "Oh, you'll leave all right," Cain sneered. "But first, you're going to learn what happens to people who don't know their place." He started dragging David toward the alley beside the gym, a place known for being just out of view of security cameras. That's when Jason Statham's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "I believe the young man said he'll leave." The words were calm, measured, and carried the weight of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of. Cain turned, still gripping David's jacket, and faced the unexpected interruption. Recognition flickered across his face. Everyone knew Jason Statham, but instead of backing down, a cruel smile spread across his features. This was even better than beating up some homeless kid. Taking down a Hollywood action star would make him legendary in the fighting world. Well, Cain laughed, shoving David aside roughly. Look who it is. You know, I always wondered how much of those movies was real and how much was just clever editing. Marcus and Jake moved to flank their leader, their own grins matching his predatory smile. Jason remained perfectly still, his stance relaxed but ready. We both know this isn't about fighting. It's about bullying someone who can't defend themselves. Not very sporting for someone who calls himself a warrior. The beast's face darkened at the implied insult. You want to test how real my fighting is, movie star? I've got 15 straight wins in real fights, not choreographed Hollywood dance moves. He stepped forward, his massive frame meant to intimidate. Maya had helped David to his feet and was trying to quietly lead him away from the situation, but like everyone else, they found themselves unable to leave. There was something in the air, a tension that promised this moment would become something people would talk about for years to come. Ray Fletcher, the gym owner, had emerged from his office, drawn by the commotion. He knew Cain's reputation but also relied on the fighter's name to attract new members to his gym. Now he stood in the doorway, conflict evident on his face as he watched the situation unfold. 15 wins against people who feared you before they stepped in the ring, Jason replied, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that made some of the onlookers step back. But I'm not afraid of bullies. Never have been, never will be. Cain's patience snapped. He lunged forward with the speed that had surprised so many opponents, throwing a haymaker that would have knocked out most men. But Jason wasn't most men. He slipped the punch with a movement so subtle it looked like Cain had simply missed. Even though everyone watching knew that was impossible, the beast never missed. The underground fighter's momentum carried him forward, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He recovered quickly, turning to face Jason with his guard up, but something had changed. The aura of invincibility that usually surrounded him had cracked. Last chance, Jason offered, still in that same measured tone. Walk away. Apologize to the young man, and we can all go about our day. But Cain, the beast Rodriguez, hadn't earned his reputation by backing down. With a roar of rage, he charged forward, throwing a combination of punches that had overwhelmed every previous opponent. Yet somehow, Jason wasn't where the punches landed. He moved like water, each shift of his body just enough to make Cain's strikes miss by millimeters. The crowd had grown larger, with phones recording what everyone sensed would be an extraordinary moment. Maya held David close, both of them watching with a mixture of fear and hope as someone finally stood up to the man who had terrorized so many. Cain's frustration grew with each missed punch, his technique becoming sloppier as rage replaced strategy. That's when Jason stopped evading and began his own offense. His first strike was so fast many missed it, a short, sharp jab that snapped Cain's head back and stopped his advance cold. The beast touched his nose, looking at the blood on his fingers with disbelief. No one had ever made him bleed so easily. His followers, Marcus and Jake, started to move forward, but one look from Jason froze them in place. This was between him and Cain now. Still think it's all clever editing? Jason asked, his position perfect for either attack or defense. The question only enraged Cain further, leading him to throw everything he had into one massive assault. But this time, Jason didn't just evade, he countered. What happened next was like watching a masterclass in martial arts. Every wild punch from Cain was met with a precise strike from Jason. Each attempt to grapple was turned against the larger man. The beast's reputation for violence was being dismantled with surgical precision, and everyone watching knew they were seeing something special. The end came with a combination so smooth it looked choreographed, except for the very real impact visible on Cain's face. A deflection of another wild punch, a step inside his guard, and 3 rapid strikes, body, head, body. The beast, for the first time in his fighting career, fell to his knees. Jason stepped back, giving Cain space to make his choice. The fallen fighter looked up, blood running from his nose, the invincible aura completely shattered. Around them, the crowd was silent, phones still recording every moment. The thing about real fighting, Jason said, loud enough for everyone to hear, is that it's not about who's bigger or who can hurt others the most. It's about skill, discipline, and choosing the right reasons to fight. Bullying a homeless teenager? Those are never the right reasons. Kane struggled to his feet, his followers rushing to help him but stopping short at his growled command. He swayed slightly, looking at Jason with a mixture of rage and, surprisingly, respect. For a long moment, everyone waited to see what would happen next. Finally, the beast spat blood onto the concrete and nodded once. Without a word, he turned and walked into the gym, his mystique of invincibility left behind on the pavement. Marcus and Jake hurried after him, leaving behind a crowd that burst into excited chatter and movement. Maya and David approached Jason, the teenager's eyes wide with awe and gratitude. "Thank you," David said softly. No one's ever stood up for me like that." Jason turned to him with a gentle smile that contrasted sharply with the precision fighter they'd just witnessed. "Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, mate. Everyone." The video of Cain Rodriguez's defeat spread across social media like wildfire, racking up millions of views within hours. The underground fighting community was buzzing with discussions about how Hollywood action star Jason Statham had dismantled the beast's reputation in less than 5 minutes. But while the internet celebrated the viral moment, a deeper story was unfolding on the streets of Los Angeles. Maya Thompson stood in the doorway of her youth shelter, watching as David Collins tentatively stepped inside for the first time. The morning's events had shaken something loose in the teenager's carefully constructed walls of isolation. Jason Statham hadn't just defended him, he'd shown him that someone could stand up to the darkness in the world and win. The shelter was a modest building, but it was clean and safe, with the smell of fresh coffee and breakfast wafting from the small kitchen. Other young people moved about, some casting curious glances at David, others too absorbed in their own struggles to notice the newcomer. Maya had been trying to convince David to come here for weeks, but it had taken today's intervention to finally break through. Jason had insisted on accompanying them to the shelter, his presence adding an air of surreality to the morning. He sat now at a worn table, his designer jacket draped over a chair that had seen better days, listening intently as David slowly began to share his story. It was a tale that had become all too familiar in the city. A family torn apart by tragedy, a system too overwhelmed to properly help, and a young life cast adrift on the streets. "I was scared to come here before," David admitted, his fingers wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. "Kane and his crew, they'd made it clear what would happen if I tried to change things. Said people like me didn't deserve better." His voice was stronger now, the terror of the morning replaced by a cautious hope. Maya wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but she knew David wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, she focused on practical matters. "We have a bed available and there's a program that can help you finish your GED. No pressure, but the opportunity is here when you're ready." Outside the shelter, life in the city continued its relentless pace, but the ripples from the morning's confrontation were spreading. Ray Fletcher stood in his gym office, watching through the window as Cain Rodriguez destroyed a punching bag, the fighter's fury evident in every savage strike. The gym owner's phone hadn't stopped ringing since the video went viral, some calls from reporters seeking comment, others from fighters wanting to challenge the now vulnerable beast. Cain's followers, Marcus and Jake, huddled near the weight room, their usual bravado replaced by uncertain whispers. The gym's other members gave them a wide berth. The power dynamic shifted dramatically by their leader's very public defeat. The air was thick with tension, everyone waiting to see how the beast would handle his first taste of humiliation. Back at the shelter, Jason shared stories from his own past, not of movie sets and Hollywood glamour, but of the hard work and discipline that had shaped his life before fame. "Success isn't about being the strongest or the most feared," he explained to David. "It's about getting up every time life knocks you down and believing in yourself even when no one else does." Maya noticed other shelter residents drifting closer, drawn by Jason's presence but staying to listen to his words. Among them was Sarah, a 17-year-old runaway who had arrived at the shelter 3 months ago, and Michael, a quiet 15-year-old who reminded Maya so much of David. "But how do you do it?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do you stand up to someone like Cain when everything in you is screaming to run away?" Jason leaned forward, his expression serious. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified. Cain might look invincible, but bullies like him rely on fear more than actual strength. Once you stand up to that fear, you realize they're just people, same as anyone else. The conversation was interrupted by Maya's phone buzzing with urgent messages. The video had reached local news stations, and reporters were asking questions about the homeless teen in the footage. Some had already figured out the location of the shelter, and Maya could see a news van circling the block. "This might complicate things," she said, showing the messages to Jason. "Once they identify David, they'll want interviews, statements. The attention could make things difficult for him." Jason nodded, understanding the potential problems. Viral fame could be a double-edged sword, especially for someone in David's vulnerable position. But before they could discuss it further, a commotion outside drew their attention. Cain Rodriguez stood on the sidewalk in front of the shelter, his massive frame casting a shadow through the window. He was alone this time, without his usual entourage, but his presence sent an immediate ripple of tension through the building. David instinctively moved away from the window, his brief confidence crumbling in the face of his tormentor. Jason rose smoothly to his feet, but Maya held up a hand. Through the window, she could see something different in Cain's posture. Gone was the swaggering arrogance, replaced by what almost looked like uncertainty. The beast shifted his weight from foot to foot, then, to everyone's surprise, walked to the shelter's door and knocked. Maya opened the door cautiously, aware of Jason positioning himself between Cain and David. But the beast made no aggressive moves. Instead, he stood there, his knuckles bruised and raw from his session with the punching bag, looking more human than anyone had ever seen him. "I want to talk," Cain said, his voice rougher than usual. "No trouble. He kept his hands visible, away from his body, a fighter's acknowledgement of peaceful intentions. Maya looked at David, letting him make the choice. The teenager was pale but stood straighter as he met Cain's eyes. After a long moment, he nodded once. Cain stepped inside, his massive frame seeming somehow smaller in the humble surroundings of the shelter. He looked around, taking in the worn furniture, the motivational posters on the walls, the quiet dignity of a place dedicated to helping those in need. "I watched the video," Cain began, his words careful and measured. "Saw myself through other people's eyes for the first time. Saw what I'd become." He paused, struggling with words that didn't come as easily as punches. The comments, they weren't about the fight. They were about what I was doing before it. About me picking on a kid with nowhere else to go. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the usual background noise of the shelter seemed muted, as if the building itself was holding its breath. "I started fighting because I was angry at the world," Cain continued. "Thought being feared meant being respected. But today..." He looked at Jason, then back to David. "Today I learned the difference between fear and respect. And I learned it the hard way." David stepped forward slightly, still keeping Jason between himself and Cain. "Why did you really come here?" he asked, his voice stronger than anyone expected. Cain reached into his jacket, causing several people to tense, but he pulled out only a folded piece of paper. "This is the deed to a small property I own. 3-bedroom house, nothing fancy, but it's paid for. I've been renting it out, making extra cash." He placed the paper on a nearby table. "I want to donate it to the shelter. Give kids like you a real place to stay, not just temporary beds." Maya's eyes widened as she picked up the deed, verifying its authenticity. A property like this could double the shelter's capacity, offer more permanent solutions for teens trying to get back on their feet. "Why?" David asked again, but this time the question held no fear, only curiosity. Cain looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the shelter's residents one by one. "Because it's time I started fighting for something that matters. Real respect isn't earned by making others fear you. It's earned by helping them overcome their fears." Jason watched the exchange with quiet approval, seeing the transformation that a single moment of clarity could bring. The beast wasn't gone, Cain's strength and fighting spirit were still evident in every movement, but now those qualities might be directed toward protection rather than intimidation. Maya began discussing the logistics of the property donation with Cain, their conversation creating a buzz of excitement among the shelter's residents. David remained quiet, processing the dramatic shift in his reality. In the span of a few hours, his greatest tormentor had become an unexpected ally. "Sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought with fists," Jason said softly to David. "Sometimes they're fought within ourselves, deciding who we want to be and what we stand for." Outside, the news van had finally found the shelter, and reporters were setting up their equipment. But inside, something more important than a viral video was taking place. A story of redemption, courage, and the power of standing up for what's right, even when everything seems stacked against you. The story of Cain Rodriguez's transformation from feared underground fighter to unlikely community hero spread far beyond the viral video of his defeat. In the weeks that followed the confrontation with Jason Statham, the Beast became something entirely different, a symbol of change that inspired others to question their own paths. Ray Fletcher's elite combat training center had undergone its own metamorphosis. The gym's atmosphere, once thick with testosterone and intimidation, had shifted. Cain's former territory had become a place of genuine training and mentorship. The fighter who once terrorized the weak now spent his mornings teaching self-defense classes to at-risk youth, with David Collins attending every session. Jason Statham had stayed in Los Angeles longer than planned, drawn into the unexpected story of redemption. He watched from the corner of the gym as Cain worked with a group of teenagers, including several from Maya's shelter. The former bully's coaching style was tough but encouraging, his experience in the ring now used to build confidence rather than instill fear. "Keep your guard up, David," Cain called out, holding focus mitts for the teenager. "Remember, it's not about hitting harder, it's about staying protected while looking for the right moment." David nodded, his movements showing the results of weeks of dedicated training. The same hands that had once grabbed his jacket in threat now helped him up when he stumbled, teaching him to face his fears instead of running from them. Marcus and Jake, Cain's former followers, had initially disappeared after their leader's change of heart. But they returned a week later, drawn by curiosity about the gym's transformation. But found themselves swept up in the new atmosphere, their own attitudes shifting as they witnessed the power of positive mentorship. Maya Thompson had converted Cain's donated property into a transitional home for older teens, a place where they could learn independence while still having support. She stood in the renovated living room, watching as another young resident moved in, carrying everything they owned in a single backpack, just as David had done weeks before. "Sometimes the smallest actions create the biggest changes," Jason remarked, joining Maya at the house. He had become a regular visitor, his presence lending credibility to the program while his practical advice helped the teens navigate their new beginnings. Cain could have let his defeat destroy him. Instead, he let it rebuild him. The underground fighting community had responded to Cain's transformation with mixed reactions. Some dismissed it as a publicity stunt, others saw it as weakness. But when a notorious fighter known as the Scorpion showed up at the gym, looking to capitalize on the Beast's supposed softening, he found that Cain's new purpose had only made him stronger. "You've gone soft, Rodriguez," the Scorpion taunted, his entourage filming with their phones, hoping to create another viral moment. "Teaching street kids to dance around? The Beast I knew would have eaten them alive." Cain continued wrapping his hands, his voice calm but firm. "The Beast you knew was hiding from himself. Want to see how fighting with purpose changes things?" He gestured to the ring, not as a threat, but as an invitation to learn the same lesson he had. The sparring session that followed wasn't about dominance or humiliation. Cain fought with controlled power, using his skills to demonstrate rather than destroy. When the Scorpion launched a vicious illegal knee, Cain didn't retaliate with anger. Instead, he used the moment to show the watching teens how to defend against dirty tactics without losing control. "See that?" Cain explained afterward, helping his opponent up despite the Scorpion's scowl. "Real strength isn't about hurting others. It's about having the power to hurt them and choosing not to." The videos posted from this encounter told a different story than the ones that had made him infamous. This was a warrior who had found a better way to fight. David's progress became a testament to the power of mentorship. The teenager who had once huddled in fear now stood tall, his newfound confidence evident in every movement. He worked part-time at the gym, studying for his GED in between training sessions, his story inspiring other shelter residents to believe in their own potential. "I used to think being strong meant being feared," David shared during a group session at the transitional home. "Kane taught me that real strength is about lifting others up, not pushing them down." The other teens nodded, many of them having witnessed firsthand the change in both Kane and David. Jason had incorporated elements of this transformation into his upcoming film project, but not in the way Hollywood might have expected. Instead of a story about violence and revenge, it became a tale of redemption and community. He brought in Kane as a technical advisor, using the fighter's experience to add authenticity to scenes about choosing a better path. "The best fights," Jason explained to a group of young actors, "are the ones we have with ourselves. The ones where we decide who we want to be." Kane stood nearby, nodding in agreement, understanding now what those words truly meant. The Elite Combat Training Center began offering free classes to shelter residents, creating a bridge between two worlds that had once seemed impossibly far apart. Ray Fletcher, initially skeptical of the change, found his gym becoming a model for others in the fighting community. "It's not just about throwing punches," Ray told a local reporter. "It's about building character, teaching discipline, showing these kids they have value." The waiting list for classes grew, with parents from across the city hoping to enroll their children in a program that taught more than just fighting. Maya's shelter program expanded, supported by donations that followed the publicity of Kane's transformation. The transitional home became a symbol of second chances, its success leading to plans for similar projects in other neighborhoods. David, now settled into his own room there, often gave tours to new arrivals, his story offering hope to those just beginning their journey. When Jason Statham stood up to Kane that day, Maya reflected during a community meeting, he didn't just stop a bully. He started a chain reaction of positive change. The meeting room was filled with faces that would have been unimaginable together weeks ago, former street kids sitting beside MMA fighters, social workers planning programs with gym trainers. Kane's underground fighting career had effectively ended, but his influence in the fighting world grew stronger. He began working with other gyms, sharing his experience of transformation, showing that strength could be used for more than dominance. Some fighters laughed, others listened, but all had to acknowledge the power of his example. "You want to know what happened to the beast?" Kane asked a young fighter who questioned his new path. "He grew up, learned that the hardest opponent you'll ever face is the person you see in the mirror every morning." The security cameras that had missed so many acts of bullying now captured daily scenes of progress, teenagers learning to defend themselves, former antagonists working together, a community healing its own wounds. The alley where Kane had once cornered his victims became a spot where older students practiced their techniques, teaching newer ones the basics of self-defense. Jason's continued presence in the community attracted attention, but not for the reasons anyone expected. He deflected questions about his upcoming film, focusing instead on the real story unfolding at the gym and shelter. His social media posts highlighted the achievements of the teens, sharing their successes with his millions of followers. Every now and then, Jason told an interviewer who asked about the viral video, something happens that reminds us why martial arts exists in the first place. It's not about creating warriors, it's about building better human beings. The transformation extended beyond the gym's walls. Local businesses, inspired by the change, began offering job opportunities to shelter residents. A coffee shop near the gym hired David for weekend shifts, while other teens found work in nearby stores and restaurants. The community that had once looked away from its problems now faced them together. Kane's evening classes became legendary, not for their intensity, but for their impact. He combined physical training with life lessons, using his own story to show that change was always possible. Every day, he would tell his students, "You have a choice about who you want to be. Make that choice count." As the sun set over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the gym's entrance where the story began, David and Kane often stayed late, training together. The spot that had once been a place of fear had become a symbol of transformation, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes come from the most unexpected moments. 1 year after Jason Statham's encounter with Kane Rodriguez, The Elite Combat Training Center hosted an event that would have seemed impossible in the days of the Beast's reign. The gym's annual showcase had transformed from an exhibition of raw power into a celebration of community transformation, drawing attendees from across Los Angeles and beyond. David Collins stood center stage, his presence commanding attention not through intimidation, but through the quiet confidence of someone who had found their path. At 17, he had not only completed his GED but had also become one of the gym's most respected junior instructors. The teenagers he taught saw in him a mirror of their own potential, someone who had risen from the depths of despair to become a beacon of hope. Jason Statham had returned to Los Angeles specifically for this event, taking a break from his latest film project. He watched from the sidelines as Kane and David demonstrated self-defense techniques to a packed crowd. The Hollywood action star smiled, remembering the morning that had set this chain of events in motion. A year ago, Kane addressed the audience, his voice carrying to every corner of the renovated gym, "I thought strength was about making others fear you. I was wrong." He gestured to the dozens of young faces in the crowd, many of them former shelter residents. Real strength is about lifting others up when they're down, standing up for what's right, and having the courage to change. Maya Thompson sat in the front row, surrounded by current and former shelter residents. The transitional home program had expanded to 3 properties, with plans for more in the works. The success stories had attracted attention from city officials and private donors, turning a local initiative into a model for other communities. "When people ask me what changed," Kane continued, moving across the mat with the same fluid grace that had once made him feared in underground fights, "I tell them about the morning I met David Collins. Not the morning I lost a fight to Jason Statham, though that certainly got my attention." Light laughter rippled through the crowd. "No, I mean the morning I truly saw David, and through him, saw myself." The demonstration area had been set up where Kane had once cornered David. Now, it was a space where teenagers learned to overcome their fears, where former bullies discovered the power of mentorship, and where the community came together to support its most vulnerable members. Ray Fletcher, watching from his office doorway, could hardly believe the transformation of his gym. The trophy case that once displayed symbols of dominance now held certificates of achievement from youth programs, newspaper clippings about community outreach, and photos of successful students who had found their way off the streets. The real fight, Kane demonstrated a defensive technique with David's help, isn't in the ring. It's in here. He tapped his chest. It's the battle between who you are and who you could be. Every day you make that choice. Marcus and Jake, once Kane's intimidating followers, had found their own paths to redemption. They now ran the gym's outreach program, visiting schools and community centers to share their stories of transformation. Their presence at these events served as a powerful reminder that change was possible for anyone willing to embrace it. Jason stepped forward at Kane's invitation, joining them on the mat. The audience's excitement was palpable. Many had seen the viral video of their confrontation, but few had witnessed what came after. Together, they demonstrated how martial arts could be used for protection rather than aggression, for building up rather than tearing down. A year ago, Jason addressed the crowd, "I came to this gym looking for authenticity for a film. What I found instead was a story more powerful than anything Hollywood could script." He gestured to Kane and David. "These men and this community showed me that the greatest fights aren't won with fists, they're won with heart." The showcase continued with demonstrations from students of all ages. Young people who had once lived in fear of walking past the gym now moved across its mats with confidence. Their techniques weren't perfect, but their spirits shone with the determination of those who had discovered their own worth. A local news crew covered the event, their cameras capturing more than just the physical demonstrations. They recorded the testimonials of teens whose lives had been changed, of parents who had watched their children transform, and of community members who had witnessed their neighborhood heal. "The streets aren't any less tough," David spoke to a group of new shelter residents who had come to watch. "But we're stronger when we stand together. A year ago, I was hiding from my fears. Now I help others face theirs." His words carried the weight of lived experience, reaching those who might not trust mere optimism. Maya shared stories of the transitional home's success. Over 50 young people had passed through its doors in the past year, with more than 30 moving on to stable housing and employment. The program's waiting list had grown, but so had the community's commitment to supporting it. Sometimes, she told the camera, all it takes is one person willing to stand up and say, "This isn't right." Jason did that for David. Then David did it for others. Now, we have a whole community of people standing up for each other. Kane's underground fighting reputation had faded, replaced by a new kind of respect. Other fighters who had once sought to challenge him now came to learn from him, not about fighting techniques, but about the power of transformation. The beast had become a teacher, showing others how to tame their own inner demons. The hardest thing, Kane explained to a young fighter who had come seeking guidance, is admitting that the path you're on isn't the right one. The second hardest thing is having the courage to change it. But once you do, he looked around at the thriving community that had grown from that single moment of change. Once you do, you realize that true strength was waiting for you all along. The event concluded with a ceremony honoring the program's graduates, young people who had completed their GED, secured stable employment, or achieved personal goals they had once thought impossible. Each success story strengthened the foundation of hope that had been built on the ashes of fear. Jason, Kane, and David stood together for photographs afterward, their unlikely friendship a testament to the power of second chances. The image would go viral, just as the fight had a year ago, but this time telling a story of transformation rather than confrontation. When people see this, Jason said, gesturing to the vibrant community around them, they often ask if I knew this would happen. If I saw the potential for change when I stepped in that morning. He smiled at David and Kane. The truth is, you never know how far a single act of courage will ripple out. You just have to be willing to take that first step. The gym had become more than a training facility. It was a sanctuary where strength was measured not in victories over others, but in victories over oneself. The alley that had once hidden acts of cruelty now hosted community gatherings, its walls covered in murals painted by local youth artists. As the crowd began to disperse, David led a group of visitors through the gym, sharing its history and transformation. He stopped at the entrance, the same spot where his life had changed a year ago. People ask me if I'm angry about what happened here, he told them. But how can I be? Without that moment, none of this would exist. Kane watched his former victim now stand as an equal, teaching others the lessons they had both learned. The beast was gone, but in its place stood something far more powerful, a man who had found his true strength in helping others find theirs. Maya's shelter and the gym had formed an unbreakable partnership, creating a support system that caught young people before they fell through society's cracks. The model was being studied by other cities, proving that community transformation was possible anywhere people were willing to stand up for what was right. As the sun set on the showcase, casting the same long shadows that had witnessed the confrontation a year ago, Jason prepared to return to his film work. But he knew that the real story, the one that couldn't be captured in any script, would continue to unfold in this community. Remember, he told the gathered crowd in his final remarks, every morning when you wake up, you have a choice about who you want to be. Choose to be someone who makes a difference. Choose to be someone who stands up for others. Choose to be someone who shows that change is possible. The legacy of that morning confrontation had become something far greater than a viral video or a moment of justice. It had become a testament to the power of transformation, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, one person willing to stand up can light the way for others to follow. Drop a comment below sharing a moment when you stood up for what was right, or when someone stood up for you. Your story might be the inspiration someone else needs to make their own change for the better.